Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being here. It's my pleasure to welcome you. My name is Joe Farrar. I'm Senior Vice President here at Georgetown, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to Dahlgren Chapel of the Sacred Heart for this special dialogue on the contributions of John Courtney Murray, S.J., a Jesuit theologian who helped shape Catholic thinking on democracy and participation in public life. For nearly a decade now, Dahlgren dialogues such as these have brought our community together here at Georgetown around some of the most pressing social, political, and religious issues of our time. In a context of prayer and reflection, they have embodied what it means to connect the principles of Catholic social teaching with the challenges of public life here in the nation's capital and beyond. I'm deeply grateful to our colleagues in the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life, led by Kim Daniels, and our Office of Mission and Ministry, led by Father Mark Bosco, for their work to make these gatherings possible. Tonight's dialogue takes place at a difficult moment for our nation and for our global community. A time of serious challenges to our public institutions, a time of intense polarization, and a time when we see violence and suffering around the world. As our community continues to think about and engage these challenges into the future, we draw on the rich resources that the tradition of Catholic social thought provides us. It's in this spirit, guided by our tradition, that we are honored to have with us His Eminence Robert Cardinal McElroy, who was installed last spring as the 8th Archbishop of Washington. For nearly 5 decades, Cardinal McElroy has been an important pastoral leader and moral voice on the issues at the intersection of faith and democracy. He is the author of 2 books on morality, faith, and public life: The Search for an American Public Theology, The Contribution of John Courtney Murray, and Morality and American Foreign Policy, The Role of Ethics in International Affairs. Cardinal McElroy, we're grateful to welcome you back to campus for tonight's dialogue, and thank you for your continued leadership in the Church. Also with us tonight are 3 distinguished leaders in Catholic higher education: Dr. Kathleen Caveney, President Vincent Rougeau, and President Rob Fisher. Dr. Caveney is a faculty member at Boston College with appointments at both the Law School and the Department of Theology. She has authored several books on the intersection between law, religion, and morality, including Law's Virtues, A Culture of Engagement, and Prophecy Without Contempt. Vincent Rougeau serves as the president of the College of the Holy Cross and previously was dean of the Boston College Law School and also served as a faculty member at Notre Dame Law School. President Rougeau is the author of Christians in the American Empire, Faith and Citizenship in the New World Order. Rob Fisher is the president of the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, and the former dean of the University of St. Thomas School of Law. He is the author of Conscience and the Common Good and has written extensively on faith, pluralism, and polarization. So Dr. Caveney, President Rougeau, and President Fisher, thank you all for your presence and reflections as part of this special gathering. And before we begin our discussion this evening, I'm going to now turn to Father Andy Downing, Director of Ignatian Programs in our Office of Mission and Ministry, who's going to share a few reflections on Dahlgren Chapel and the space we're in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. It's really just my purpose to welcome you to this space, Dahlgren Chapel of the Sacred Heart, a place where for generations members of the Georgetown University community have gathered They've gathered to pray, to worship, to encounter Christ in this space. And so it's particularly apt to host these Dahlgren Dialogues here, to gather people together to consider, to discuss the implications of what that encounter with Christ mean. That's what we do tonight. That's appropriate in this space, maybe especially appropriate when the conversation revolves around the thought of John Courtney Murray, one of the most distinguished Jesuit thinkers of the 20th century. And that's what we come here to hear and to engage in. It's also my purpose to give a very warm word of gratitude to the Initiative for Catholic Social Thought and Public Life. We co-sponsor these dialogues. We enthusiastically collaborate through them with the initiative. And I also give great thanks to Kim Daniels, the director of the initiative, for her work in bringing about these dialogues and for moderating our conversation this evening. So again, I welcome you all to this space. I welcome you all to this conversation. And I'd like now to introduce Ahoya, a student here who will lead us in prayer, Kira Farrell.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Give me a heart of poverty, able to love and open up and give myself to others. Give me a heart of patience, able to love and live in hope. Give me a heart of peacefulness, able to love and sow peace in the world. Give me a heart of justice, able to love and measure myself by the standard of justice. Give me a heart of mercifulness, able to love and understand and forgive others. Give me a heart of sensitivity, able to love and understand, able to love and weep without being discouraged. Give me a heart of purity, able to love and see God in everyone. Give me a heart of strength, able to love and be faithful unto death. Give me a heart touched by you, able to love. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kira. Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you so much, Father Andy. We're so grateful for your time here today and for our collaboration with the Office of Mission and Ministry. So thank you very much. I want to welcome all of you who are here with us in Dahlgren Chapel tonight. Of course, welcoming Cardinal McElroy to join us here at Georgetown. Welcoming the 2,200 of you that are watching online right now. I'm Kim Daniels. I'm the director of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life here at Georgetown. And I most of all want to thank you for joining us for this very important and timely conversation on faith, democracy, and the common good, lessons from John Courtney Murray for our time. Cardinal McElroy joined us here at Georgetown almost 10 years ago to have a very similar conversation on these themes during Pope Francis' pontificate and during President Trump's first term. Since then, much has happened, including the election of a new pope, Pope Leo XIV. Where Francis warned of a worldwide retreat from democracy, Pope Leo's early papacy has been shaped by a world suffering from the effects of that retreat, especially by what he calls a zeal for war on the global stage. Today, in our U.S. context, we find ourselves in a war in Iran launched without public debate or congressional authorization, sidestepping the very democratic processes meant to slow the march to war. Meanwhile, in the U.S., we've had months of violence and cruelty caused by a nationwide immigration enforcement campaign and a wave of detentions that courts have consistently ruled unlawful. And underlying all of this is the steady undermining of institutions meant to help ensure that our political leaders are held accountable. courts whose rulings are flouted, a press labeled as the enemy, a civil service dismantled. These are not isolated actions. They amount to a systematic weakening of the guardrails of democracy. And this has been enabled, of course, by the intense polarization that has gripped our country now for years. Our Catholic tradition, though, offers something different, a call to participate in public life, not as partisans, but in service to the common good. And the American Jesuit theologian John Courtney Murray taught that human dignity, which is, of course, the foundational principle of Catholic social thought, is best served when people pursue truth and the common good in a free and deliberative way, when states defend the freedoms necessary for people to do so. So tonight, we're really honored to have these remarkable Catholic scholars and leaders here with us to talk about what Murray and the Catholic social tradition can offer us in this challenging moment. So Cardinal McElroy, welcome back to Georgetown, and thank you for being with us. We're grateful for your long.
It's not as far a drive as last time.
We were just talking about the weather. It's a little different from San Diego, where Cardinal McElroy was coming from the last time he was with us. We're grateful for your time with us, for your longstanding support for our initiative. And I want to talk tonight about start by talking about your service as a pastor, your scholarship on faith and democracy, and Murray in particular, your concerns as a citizen. What's your assessment of where we are right now in terms of the state of our democracy? And what are the specific threats that we face? And what do we need to do to preserve and protect our democratic institutions? Just a little question.
Sure. Well, I'll start with Murray then.
Okay.
John Courtney Murray believed that democracy had a twofold meaning, and he was very strong on this. It in part was process. The process had to be democratic. But he said it's not just that democracy also has a substantive element that is the defense of what he called the res sacra, mainly the dignity of the human person, but all those sacred elements within society that can be at risk. And so he said, when you judge a democracy and how democratic it is and whether it's weakening, you have to look at both those elements. And I fear both those elements are weakening in this moment in which we live. You know, in terms of democratic processes, that those who should be guarding the processes of our democracy that are so sacred are not doing so, or only partly doing so. There's an effort to run away from responsibility so much. And with that, it's a very dire dilemma we're put in our institutions, because it does no good to have institutions if no one is willing to carry out the responsibility of those institutions. And so that's true on the process side, but also on the substantive side. We've seen in these moments, you know, on the immigration question, basic human dignity is being assaulted. And that in our streets now, you know, we live in a country where the mask has become the new face of American justice. That is a great tragedy for us. And that in our own country, the polarization has prevented us from coming to have a consensus. Murray was big in believing, as were our founders as a country, big in believing there needs to be a substantive consensus among the people of the country about basic issues that they can come together on and agree with. And that is dissipating. The polarization is eating into that and corroding that. And so all of these are, to my mind, very ominous developments. It doesn't mean that we're cascading out of a democracy, but it does mean that the institutions which are guardians of our democracy and sources of our democratic meaning, that those are in disarray now, and also they're teetering, I'd have to say. And we have to move to arrest that now.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about Murray for a moment, because I think it's so interesting to think about what his thought means for our current moment, which is very different from when he wrote. You wrote a book, The Search for an American Public Theology, the contribution of John Courtney Murray. And looking back on that and looking back on his work, what do you think his most enduring insight is for our democracy today? And how can he help us as Catholics speak to the wider society?
Well, one important element was, in Murray's view, we live in a society in which the great society, as he called it, society, with all of the cultural elements, the educational institutions, religious institutions and community, that is where freedom should reign, and that is where the common good is most greatly accomplished. And then within that is the sphere of politics and then government. Those are each one is smaller than society. But there need to be distinctions between where government should be and where it should not be, and then the society as a whole. I think one of his critiques of this moment, one of his alarm bells at this moment would be, we see government now encroaching upon areas of society and culture, educational institutions, the arts, in which you never would have thought we'd be in this boat now. And that really erodes in the law firms, you know. This erodes the notion that government has a particular realm that it cannot use its coercive powers to intrude into. And so I'd say on the domestic level, that's one issue I'd say is really paramount for today for Murray. The second one is on the role of morality in foreign policy. Murray wrote a lot on foreign policy. And he was writing at a time when a writer, Hans Morgenthau, who was a very monumental theorist, argued that he was the father of realism. He argued that power is interests, and a country should pursue its national interest, that is, power, and that we should not give much thought to ideas and morality behind it. That was the early realism of Morgenthau. Murray comes at this and says, this is all wrong. Morgenthau says we can't have rules that are across cases. We can't have principles in morality for foreign policy. Murray says that is not true unless we have rules, unless we have nations working together in collaboration. We're going to founder. And he has a very striking image that he uses, because he's talking after World War II, when the U.S. had tremendous power. You know, our GDP was as high as all the rest of the countries in the world after World War II. And what he said was, if we go with Morgenthau on stress on interests and power over morality, helping to shape interests and power and actions, he said America will become a lost giant, lumbering in the world destructively. And that's what I fear we're becoming, a lost giant, lumbering in the world destructively and lurching from one situation to the next. And so I think that Murray's battle there is one we must really join. It's certainly at the core of the Catholic tradition on this, and that's why in speaking to the war, say, in the present moment, our position is so clear. That is, within Catholic thought, there are differences between those who stress active nonviolence and those who stress just war. But either way, the reasoning comes out the same. This war is not just. And this notion, as the Pope said, war is in vogue. That is utterly incompatible with Catholic thinking. So Murray said that then, and I think that's what he would leave with us now in the foreign policy, that there need to be moral rules that do apply across cases and across countries, or else we will have a destructiveness and the lumbering giant.
And I think you've seen the Vatican be so outspoken, certainly Pope Leo, but just today, Cardinal Parolin spoke very decisively again about calling for an end to the war. Let me return now to our domestic context for a minute. Yes. You spoke of civil society institutions earlier, and I think one of the really interesting and something that makes me very proud as a Catholic is the way in which church leaders have been standing up yourself and many others as well. I want to talk a little bit about a homily you gave last September, where you said, "We are witnessing a comprehensive governmental assault designed to produce fear and terror and to rob undocumented immigrants of any real peace." And along with Cardinals Tobin and Supich, of course, you've recently spoken out about what you call this administration's destructive policies. And we've seen that erupt into deadly violence in places like Minneapolis. So when Murray says that what we're doing in a democracy is rooted in the equal dignity of each person, no matter what their documented status or undocumented status, no matter about their productivity or their age or stage in life or anything else, what lessons does he offer for this situation that we're facing right now? And how are you guided by that as you decide when to intervene, when to speak up?
Well, I'd say that this notion Murray had, and if we use the phrase, it's an ancient Catholic theological tradition, res sacre, that there are certain sacred elements in society, many of them building off the dignity of the human person. But he uses that sacre, I mean, it's a sacred thing. It's not just a human thing. It's founded in God's grace and dignity bestowed. And that's true of individuals, that's true of institutions that help safeguard the common good and enhance the common good. So I think he's saying to us that we need to act, and that's, I think, what the main thing going on in the immigration is, that it is such an assault on the fundamental human dignity. We have, in Washington, we have a parish where 30 people have been, one parish, detained or deported. And so we have to work together. It's interesting how parishes are doing that, frankly. They've come up with all sorts of ways to help those who are coming to our mass attendance last in the fall went down 30% at the Spanish masses. 30%. That's a lot because people are afraid to come to mass. So the parishes took steps to make people feel safe, and they're very interesting steps. A couple of them have steps where they have a core of people volunteering as security, and they'll secure the perimeter of the thing. Then they keep the key parking lot next to the church and it just says safe space, but it means undocumented immigrants. So they go park there, and they can walk right in. So there's a whole organism arising as to how to be neighbors to undocumented people who all they want to do is come to Mass. So I think the church has to spring up, but in a variety of ways. Yes, for us to speak out is important as bishops. I would say I have never seen more cohesiveness substantively on a policy and more energy combined with it among the bishops than this one, which is great. But
I think that's something we've all seen too, from the statement in November that was almost unanimous to repeated statements since then, but also, as you say, action from people in the pews to help and serve our neighbors as we're called to do. One more question before we invite up the rest of our guests tonight. I'm always struck by how John Courtney Murray envisioned the church keeping a prophetic distance from power, he said, a conscience to the powerful rather than their chaplain. What has the Catholic community, when have we lost sight of that, and when have we best served that idea?
I wouldn't word it as the bishops or so forth. They're trying to be a conscience, because we're speaking to the consciences, of the Catholic community and then the wider society, but we're not operating as the consciences. And so we as bishops are trying to contribute to the public debate and to help form conscience within the Catholic community and the society as a whole. And I think it's key that we do that. At times, though, there is a danger of getting too close to power. We in the United States, Catholic thought is bifurcated by the party structure, which is hard because then as a voter you say, how can I effectuate change? Which party do I go with? But it's a safeguard against this dilemma. It's a safeguard for us as bishops too. We, certainly as bishops, but as Catholics too, we're called to be political homeless in the environment which we enact in that way. And there can be a tendency to hint or get closer or issue statements a certain way that obscures that. And so it is a danger. all of us fall into it at some times.
Sure, thank you for that. I'd like to invite Vince and Kathy and Rob up to the stage to join us, and we'll have a brief opening question. And I'm really struck by that idea that there's a truism that Catholics are politically homeless in the United States. There's a way in which that's protective of us, right? I mean, there's a way in which it calls us to remember what we're called to do as Catholics before our political party. Thank you for that. Thank you all for joining us up here now. And I want to start, I think, with a question, sort of a brief question to each one of you before we get into a longer conversation. Kathy, I think I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
First, faith and democracy both depend on trust, right? Trust in institutions, in truth, in one another. What resources in our Catholic tradition can we look to help rebuild the kind of civic trust that sometimes it feels like we've lost?
That's a great question. And as I was listening to the Cardinal, it became clear to me that one of the reasons we don't have trust is because of the dominance of the realism in our culture, as opposed to a more principled approach. We have a situation where we think it's a war of all against all in society, where what matters is power and wealth, where you are, if you're vulnerable or sick or old, you're left by the wayside, and also that the way you get what you want in politics is by manipulating people. Catholic thought at its best challenges each and every one of these things. We believe we're meant for service in community, not for isolation. We believe that being rich and powerful is just a tool to be used for service, and that service, not power over, is the right thing. We believe that the poor and the vulnerable are at the center of the community, not at the margins. And also, and I think this is the key point, I think people don't want to be manipulated. And when you think about human dignity, which is a core concept for us, dignity actually in Latin means worthy. What are we worthy of? We are worthy of being treated as fellow citizens, as fellow members of the church, addressed straightforwardly and not manipulated. So I think on all of those 4 points, we can address the lack of trust.
That's wonderful. And I love that idea of how Catholics, how we're called at our best to put the poor and vulnerable in the center. And in a sense, when we do that, we work to build trust as well, because that's at the center of what we
Everybody's going to be vulnerable at some point and poor. We're all going to get older. We're all going to get weak.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Vince, let me turn to you with the same question. How do we look at rebuilding civic trust in these challenging times when we look to our Catholic tradition?
Well, I think I would build on some of the things that Kathy was saying, and I want to focus first on this concept of dignity. And one thing I would like to pull out from that focus is this idea of the lives we live in community with one another. We will all be weak at some point. We will all have needs. And one of the things we have to focus on, particularly in a highly individualistic society like this one, is those personal connections, the importance and the sacredness of those connections. It's not just about our dignity as individuals, it's our dignity that comes from life in community, and that means engaging membership and participation for everyone. And we are in this moment where there's so much rhetoric that is fueled by hate and division that this dignity principle and this community principle gets completely lost in this battle, for I guess the hearts and minds to, boost power. The other resource I think we have is the resource of the parish, and I just want to build quickly on something that Cardinal McElroy said. And the parish can serve as a building block of civic engagement in so many ways, and also a place of invitation for conversation across difference. And we heard about how this is being done with the Hispanic community. I've seen it done through community organizing work. And I think we as citizens have to start reclaiming the work that is necessary for each of us to do to make democracy healthy and strong. And I think we could use the parish more effectively as a place to start doing some of that work.
I love that. The parish is the center of community and a place that it's on each one of us to start to strengthen that and build it as a center. Thanks for that, Vince. Rob, how about you? Let's turn to you. We talk about civic trust and the loss of it that we felt here in the United States for a long time now. How does our Catholic tradition offer resources to rebuild it?
Yeah, so I think it's important to recognize that the different components of Catholic social teaching actually have a unifying thread, and that their aim is right relationship with God and neighbor. And that's obvious with solidarity. We're called to see others not as the other, but as brother and sister. even subsidiarity, which calls us to literally seat a service down as locally as possible. It's not just because there's some reflexive presumption that local is better. It's because when you're addressing needs at the most local level possible, you are more likely to be addressing needs in the context of relationship. Or you take civil friendship, which goes back to Aristotle, but is also reflected in Catholic social teaching. Politics is also supposed to be relational. So there's hope there, but it's also a reminder, I think, if we view political engagement today as primarily opining on the President of the United States, not that opining on the President is not important, but that is not the politics that is contemplated in Catholic social teaching. I think too often we neglect the local and the relationship building capacity local political engagement has for social media and just shouting into the wind about what we think the state of affairs in the world is. So I think that's a thread that is there, but too often we've lost it today.
Thanks for that. Thank you very much. We've heard now about serving the vulnerable. We've heard about community and relationship. I want to get back to something that Cardinal McElroy talked about earlier, Kathy, and that's power. In your work, you've talked a lot about the relationship between law, religion, and public morality. And in our current moment with democratic norms under threat, courts have often been some of the most effective bulwarks on executive power, even though sometimes courts are ignored. So how should Catholics think about the rule of law as something that supports human dignity and community and all the principles we've been talking about so far? How does the intellectual tradition of the Catholic Church fit there?
Well, I think it does fit, and I think stepping back for a minute to think about John Courtney Murray and the rule of law. When I first read about John Courtney Murray, you know, as an undergraduate, I was thinking of him in the kind of the openness mode of Vatican II, kind of, aggiornamento, a kind of flower power Jesuit maybe. And then I actually read him, and then I thought about when he died. John Courtney Murray died in 1967, in the middle of the Summer of Love. So he did not see all the fights against Vietnam. He did not see Martin Luther King's assassination. He didn't see Roe v. Wade. He didn't see the Watergate crisis. He missed all of that. And I'm not sure where he would stand on many issues politically today, because, you know, the tide turned so drastically after his death. But I am sure that he would have been in favor of the rule of law. He has a wonderful quotation where he says he's opposed to barbarism. And what is opposed to barbarism? Well, barbarism fights against a society in which there is reasonable conversation under reasonable laws. And by conversation, because he knew his Latin, because he was a Jesuit of the old school, he said, we mean two things: living together reasonably and talking together reasonably. So the rule of law is something, you know, public order is a central task of the state and of all branches of the state. And if you go back into the heart of Catholic action theory, you'll understand why. The law is a rule and measure of human action. It's supposed to be an action guide. We as Catholics do not think of law as just a negative thing. Aquinas thought you could have law in heaven because the saints would have to know what side of the road to keep their wings on, right? Or the angels. You have to organize yourself. So law, as a guide of human action, has to have certain characteristics if it's going to do its job, right? So it has to be generally applicable. It has to be publicly proclaimed. Mm-hmm. It has to be prospective. It's no good to have a law that's retrospective. It has to be constant. You can't say red light means stop today and go tomorrow. It has to have all of these procedural characteristics that allow it to guide action. And it has to apply to rulers and the ruled in a fair way. So if you think of the rule of law, you can think of it as on a spectrum. We have certain procedural requirements that I just articulated, and those apply really even to tyrants as well as to anybody else. A tyrant who's at least predictable is way better if you're planning a life than a tyrant who changes their mind all the time, right? You've got a problem. And I meant nothing by that. But then there are another set of rules that are both procedural and substantive at the same time, and these are what are enforced in the American Constitution, right? You've got, you don't deprive people of life and liberty without due process of law, which means a fair chance to confront their accuser, and also, an opportunity to hear the charges against them and to be judged by an impartial person. So those are, we don't take away people's property and, even more importantly, their life and their well-being without some fair procedure. But then you can even move further down the list and say a democracy needs certain aspects of rule of law, and they would be, freedom of the press, an independent judiciary, fair and clearly free elections. All of that is necessary to run a democracy, and those are both substantive and procedural. But you can even move one step further, and I think Catholic social thought helps us move one step further and say, you can't just have a democracy. If you have free and equal people, they have to be able to meet a certain level of knowledge. They have a right to education, health care, food and education to be able to participate. So the rule of law moves from bare procedure through basic substantive fairness, through democratic fairness, to commitment to human flourishing, which Aquinas and John Courtney Murray would approve of, because the rule of law is an ordinance of reason ultimately for the common good, which is the flourishing of the individual in a flourishing community.
Well, and I love that about Catholic teaching because it's not just procedural. We think about law as something that offers a substantive route for us to think about human flourishing. Let me take you in a different tack for a second.
I just want to add one thing, because what happened in Minnesota, shows the importance of basic rule of law, pulling people out by force and fear without a face, without any sense of compliance with basic societal and norms of law enforcement, shows how even procedure, we can't dismiss procedure, because procedure protects people.
And I think there's so much. I have, as a recovering lawyer myself, I have been so proud of the way in which so many lawyers and judges have stood up for that procedure, have reinforced it as a way of holding up a community that can offer human flourishing to the most people, regardless of their background, regardless of their vulnerability.
Right.
Let me switch tacks for a second here with you, Kathy, just to talk a little bit about something that you've written about a lot, the importance of engagement in public life as opposed to withdrawal or retreat, whether it be withdrawal into echo chambers or sectarian isolation or what have you. How can we cultivate a public voice as Catholics that is theologically rooted, that's attentive to our wider society, that doesn't retreat?
I think that that's such an important question, and I don't have all the answers, but I do have a suggestion. Where I think we took a wrong turn was in a culture war model of engagement with our fellow citizens. I don't want to dismiss John Paul II's Evangelium Vitae. There's plenty of time to talk about that, but that was weaponized in the United States and politicized in the United States. And I can't talk to you reasonably if I think you're a minion of the culture of death, right? I can't find out anything about you. I just have to resist you and put you back in a corner as much as I can. I suggest we go back to an Augustinian model. Augustine said that we all will, whatever we're willing, under the aspect of the good. Sub specie boni, under the aspect of the good. So even people with whom we're disagreeing about fundamental matters are pursuing a good in some sense. And I think the way we have a conversation is to try to find out what good they're pursuing, and then have a conversation to see how maybe our understanding of the good is disordered, but also maybe to confront them with how we think their understanding of the good is disordered. That's not a Manichaean, you're evil and I'm good, so I have to resist you. This isn't the Exorcist Chapel, is it, by the way? Just want to make sure. But we see them as fellow human beings who might be deeply mistaken but still like us, pursuing the good as they see it.
Well, I love that. We've talked about masks before, and I think Pope Francis talks so often about seeing the face of the person. It gets to this very Jesuit idea of engaging with the whole person and looking for the best in the other and listening and learning. So thanks for that. Vince, I want to turn to you now. You've talked a lot already about community, and I think we talk a little bit about Murray and the way that democracy depends on this consensus, right? This idea of a kind of shared moral consensus, a shared conviction about human dignity and the truth that undergirds our freedom. Can his confidence in this kind of shared consensus and reasoned dialogue, shared moral ground survive in the world we're in today with polarization, disinformation, economic disparity? It just seems like a very different world in some way, and I wonder how we think about Murray today.
Well, let's hope it does. I mean, because I think we are involved in, one of the greatest projects in history, this project of democratic pluralism that is bringing together people of all kinds of different backgrounds, all kinds of different religions, et cetera, to be equal citizens in a democratic society. And I think when we think about it fairly, we know that this has always been work. There have always been eras where we have not lived up to the goals that we've set for ourselves, but we've moved forward and sometimes lurched back, but we've moved in the right direction. So we have to remain committed to that. And I think, as Catholics and as Christians, we have some important tools and important obligations in that work. I mean, we have to recognize human dignity, of course, but we also have to recognize that people are using Christianity to create something very different to undermine this project. The idea of Christian nationalism, for instance, which is being promoted by Catholics, some of it, needs to really be engaged directly, because that will not achieve what we have long been committed to in this country under our Constitution and under the values that the Constitution has evolved towards. And it is clearly a way of marginalizing and minimizing the participation of certain members of this society. Now, something else our Catholic tradition gives us is an understanding of rights which are not simply weapons. We recognize as Catholics, and we recognize through Catholic social teaching, through the documents of the Council, that yes, rights are important, rights should be respected, but rights may at times need to be modified and restricted for a broader common good. And we do that by thinking of rights as also being coupled with responsibilities. Right. And something that in this country seems to be so very, very difficult is the notion of responsibility as part of our understanding of a right. Let's take the right to vote. We have a right to vote. It's an amazing thing. It's an important thing. And we see what happens when people don't vote. Well, people have a responsibility as citizens to vote. Right. And they do not take it up. Now, an important project we could be involved in if we want to preserve this pluralist democracy is to let people understand, to make people understand that they have a responsibility to vote. This right comes with a job for you. That job is to exercise it appropriately. And we could talk about a number of different other things in that context, but I think we have to be much more committed to sort of understanding why there are some limits to what we're living in terms of this kind of conversation about democracy today, and that the threats are real. And on the other side, Catholics have been involved in societies where we have been drawn very willingly into authoritarian structures in Latin America and other places. So what are those impulses in our own culture and our own religious minds that draw us to that, and how do we fight against that? This project of democracy in the United States is an attempt to do that. So one thing that I would want us to think about, and something that Cardinal McElroy mentioned and Kathy has mentioned, is if we think about our rights more robustly and we think about things we might offer for a healthier society, one that prioritizes participation and membership, rights and responsibilities, do we need to think about things like social and economic rights a little bit more aggressively? Other constitutional democracies do take that on. And that gives people, I think, a deeper sense of grounding in the project of democracy. That's something where Catholics could be part of a conversation that contributes to a more robust understanding of our democratic lives together, and would work toward a rebuilding of what we're seeing right now being very, very aggressively pulled apart.
Well, I feel like in this conversation, we've heard a lot about our responsibilities as Catholics at different levels, whether it's in a parish, it's in a community, it's as a leader, it's as a citizen, it's as a lawyer or a judge. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the idea of, you've just talked about the need for citizens to exercise their rights and responsibilities. And you've written a lot about the idea that we need to, the Catholic community needs to remain engaged in political life. How do we form citizens, particularly as your role as the head of a university? Like, how do you think about forming citizens who live that balance between faith and power with integrity, who live out their responsibility as citizens?
Well, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about as a college president, as a president of a Jesuit Catholic liberal arts college, is a big part of my job is forming citizens, forming them as moral actors, forming them as contributors, forming them as leaders, forming them as people for and with others, we say all the time. But really unpacking that and saying, you know, you don't just think about the education that we're offering young people in terms of, you know, skill building and getting a job. I mean, we are involved in a project in this country that requires morally formed citizens. We're also involved in a project that says there's no one way that has to be done, but it has to be done with the goal of coming to some shared consensus about what is important for the maintenance of our lives in common. And so I think each of us in positions of leadership, particularly in Catholic higher education, have to have that in mind when we think about the curriculum, when we think about how we construct life on campus, when we think about what is a success in terms of a student's education. So that, I think, has to be at the forefront of what we're doing, this building of a moral foundation. And, you know, I think we need to think a lot more about how we create citizens who are not tempted to be blind adherents to whatever the state tells them is true, who are critical of the state. And, you know, I mean, to go back to Minneapolis, I mean, when you hear some of the justifications that people were offering for the killings of Alex Preddy and Renee Good, they shouldn't be in the way, they should let ICE do their job, they're disloyal. I mean, that's 1930s Germany. That's, you know, a lot, that's the civil rights era. You know, my parents were subjected to that kind of talk in the South when they were involved in demonstrations, even though they were doing it from a deeply Christian and deeply moral place. Stay in your lane, know your place, get out of the way. Is that the kind of society we want to live in? I don't think so. And we as Catholics need to be thinking very deeply about what that means and need to be at the forefront of pushing conversations to remind people what is at stake and what will be lost if they follow blindly based on some sense that there are some people out there who are making their lives difficult. And so we have some work to do, but I feel that we are called to this work. This is part of a prophetic response to a difficult time, and, you know, to quote very generally what Kathy has written so beautifully about in Prophecy Without Contempt, speaking truth to power in a prophetic way that actually allows people to hear you.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Appreciate that. Rob, let me turn to you now. We've talked a lot about Minneapolis, St. Paul already tonight, and I think that you've written a lot, you've done a lot in your role out there, you've written a lot about faith pluralism, the common good, the rule of law. I'd love to talk to you and get your thoughts just to start off on this idea as we talk about institutional distrust increasing, how Catholic institutions and leaders can build bridges across differences rather than reinforce echo chambers. And what does Murray have to offer us here?
Yeah, it's a hard question. So one of the things that Murray consistently emphasized was that freedom requires order. And not an order that can be imposed from the top down, an order, he used the term flowering, order that would be the natural flowering of the moral principles held by the people. Earlier this month, Pew, you might have seen, Pew released a new survey that was a survey of citizens in 25 different countries around the world asking, do you believe most of your fellow citizens in your country are morally good? The United States was the only country where a majority said no. So you think back to Murray saying this is what you have to have for freedom, and Americans today are saying, yeah, that's not true here. What do we do with that? I don't have easy answers to that. I do think the way political conversations and our conceptualization of politics has unfolded over the last several decades may have contributed to a tendency to separate questions of moral virtue from questions of political engagement. So for the last 10 or 12 years, we've seen explicitly folks on the political right separating moral virtue from questions of political leadership, right? We're not voting for a Sunday school teacher, we're voting for a president, right? That was a very common refrain. I think Murray would have something to say about that. And I will be bipartisan in my criticism, because for longer than 10 to 12 years, there's been dimensions on the political left that have tended to disconnect moral virtue from questions of freedom, where freedom really becomes individual autonomy, as opposed to infused with deeper questions of moral virtue and what freedom is for, and are there underlying moral goods. Not everybody on the left, not everybody on the right. But those are dimensions of what we're dealing with that I think require soul searching and conversations both on the right and the left to move forward, to bring those questions of moral virtue back into who we are politically. But I think it's going to be a long, hard process.
Absolutely. I think I'm interested to learn a little bit more about what you've done. We've talked a lot about kind of the contributions that the Catholic intellectual tradition offers to these conversations and the rule of law and all the rest. You're in Minneapolis right now. You've seen the Catholic community there and the wider faith community, of course, play a role in promoting peace and the common good. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, and also what particular contributions people of faith, communities of faith can make to strengthening the health of a democracy.
Yeah. So people who saw the news over a several-week period saw neighbors armed with whistles who would alert the whole neighborhood to when ICE would come in to do a raid on someone's house, and that was very powerful and dramatic and sometimes violent. What was less remarked upon or visible in the news was there were so many more people who were engaged in what I would call the radical ministry of accompaniment. So in Minneapolis and St. Paul, we had thousands of men, women, and children who did not leave their houses for weeks, because they knew that increased the risk that they would be stopped. And it is a matter of fact that I can verify that there was profiling going on with people on the street, so families would stay in their homes. You had so many residents of the Twin Cities who stepped up, and parishes and Catholic schools, I think, led the way in this, and kept weekly grocery deliveries going for thousands of households, from the buying of the groceries to bringing them to the parish or the school to sort through them and make sure they were meeting the needs of particular families for what they needed and the ages of their kids. And then an army of vehicles going out all over the Twin Cities to deliver them to the doorstep. It was really powerful and inspiring. And to me, there are lessons in other settings and other contexts beyond what was happening with ICE in the Twin Cities. So I think one of the most important documents for Catholics to be engaged with today is Fratelli Tutti by Pope Francis. So it's amazing that today in our political discourse, the very concept of empathy is contested, of whether empathy is valid or toxic. Or Pope Francis made clear that empathy is a non-negotiable for Catholics. I mean, one of the phrases was, we are called to take responsibility for life as it is. As it is, not as we wish it were, not as we're arguing on social media that it should be, as it is. We can never have the excuse, well, I didn't vote for that, I'm not responsible for that. Life as it is. We have hundreds of families stuck in their homes with no way to get to the grocery store. What are we going to do? Life as it is. It also is a reminder that we are not afforded the luxury of residing in political or partisan silos. Here's what I mean by that. So in my time in the circles with folks who were delivering or buying groceries, I never heard anyone ask someone, well, what's your view on immigration policy? Or, you know, what do you think should be required for asylum? Or how secure should the borders be? None of that. It was serving people. There was no question about, are you from the right, are you from the left? I mean, again, in Fratelli Tutti, Francis says, our service is never ideological. We serve people, not ideas. It doesn't mean that argument over ideas and argument over ideology doesn't have its place. It does. But above all, we are called to the ministry of accompaniment, period. Walk with those in need. And then after, you can argue about politics. And so what unfolded over the last few months in the Twin Cities was, to me, a very powerful reminder of that.
I love that. Thank you for raising that. And what I want to do, I know there's going to be so many questions. We've had such a rich conversation, but I'd love to go one more time around. That's a great place for us to stop. And first to you, Cardinal McElroy, either your reaction to anything you've heard, or let's build on this idea of Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti. First, Pope Francis always said, reality is greater than ideas. That's where we start, as Rob said. Or the idea of building on a politics he called Fratelli Tutti, a better kind of politics, one in the service of the common good. So reaction to what you've heard so far, reaction to bringing Fratelli Tutti into the conversation. We'll start with you, and then over to you.
I think Fratelli Tutti has a wondrous ability to carve open space for progress on all of these elements, because it calls us to have that love, the whole framework of it. What does it mean to have the love of Christ that we're called to have in our heart? What are the implications of that? Mm-hmm. And it says to us, you can't cop out by saying it's too hard to do. Time after time, Francis is asking the impossible in Fratelli Tutti, but he's saying, do it. You know, the same way St. Francis asked it, you know. And I think that's important for us, because we can get bogged down in so many things where it just seems, this is unrealistic. But the vision of the church, the vision of Christ, I think calls us onward. And I think Fratelli Tutti is enormously helpful.
Thank you. And it becomes more realistic when it's with the body of Christ, when it's in community. Thank you very much for that. Kathy, how about you?
I was just thinking about what you were saying as an educator and Fratelli Tutti, and the key thing about the Catholic tradition is it's an incarnational tradition, right? We are embodied. We believe that God became a human being in Jesus Christ. So embodiment matters. But we are dealing with a whole generation of young people who are living their lives virtually, on the screen, in chat rooms, on TikTok, on Instagram. And there is a kind of illusion of that. So I think, and you've had sessions on this, but one challenge I think for Catholics is going to be, how do you take what's good about that, but recognize that we are an incarnational tradition, and we need to not just talk about the wounds of others, but actually touch and heal them.
Thank you for that. Thank you. How about you, Vince? What's your reaction, anything you've heard so far tonight before we move on?
Well, I found Rob's story about the Twin Cities so incredibly moving and inspiring. I mean, that is exactly what we need to activate, what we need to do. And to move to Kathy's point about embodiment, for young people to be able to recognize that by engaging with one another in their full humanity, engaging with, as the philosophers say, the dignity of the face, and being present in the flesh to help people in need, will do not only great things for those people, but will actually heal the giver. And I think we have lost our ability to channel people into those activities, right, which actually, give them that grace and give them that sense of meaning. And so we are atomized, and people are diving deep into technology. And let's not forget, there is something deeply harmful about social media. And I just heard Jonathan Haidt on the New Yorker Radio Hour, and he's on fire. He's going to devote the rest of his career to this, but it's that dangerous in his mind. And so how can we bring people back together? And we, our church, our tradition, has the resources to do that. So how will we engage one another to demonstrate the power of that? that work.
It's a great question, right? How do we move from that online engagement into a real embodied community? And that is a real challenge for Catholics that I think we have some beginning answers to, right? I mean, I think that's something we're all thinking about too. So thank you. Rob, I'll give you the last word, and then we're going to come to questions from people in the audience. We'll have microphones on each aisle. So what's your reaction to what you've heard here, Rob, so far, before we move on to questions?
Yeah, it's very hopeful, and I think one common theme is just we are called to relationship. And I'll come back. I'll just finish with 3 questions I ask myself regularly to make sure I'm oriented in the right direction. Am I spending as much time understanding political issues and opportunities for political engagement in my local community as I am following what the president just posted on social media? 2, am I involved in local organizations that could draw the participation of someone who brings a different political lens to the world than I do? Or is my local involvement also in a political silo? And 3, am I remembering that we are called to faithfulness, not necessarily to success?
I love it. Thank you so much for that. All right, so questions from the audience. Please raise your hand, and when you get the microphone, please identify yourself. Let's go ahead and get started. Who wants to start us off? Okay, over here. And students, please be sure you raise your hand. We'd love to hear from you too.
My name is Ron Ruskowski. I'm a retired physician from Williamsburg, Virginia. I belong to a small Eastern Rite Catholic church. And even in this small group, neither the clergy nor people after liturgy can speak only about what was served, coffee and tea and things, and trying to get these people to talk to each other about important things is really hard. I don't know if there's an answer to that, but if any of you have them, I think you just mentioned a lot of the things already.
Well, let me take that. Kathy, can I come to you with that? Just the idea that Rob's given us some examples of this. I feel like we all see that sometimes, where you sort of default into an easy conversation as opposed to moving to something that's a little bit more challenging. I feel like your job is challenging conversations with students sometimes. How do you navigate those kinds of conversations?
Well, first I want to say, I mean, don't discount, the importance of talking about the coffee and the donuts, right? And the reason for that is that creates a context of, kind of basic ordinary life that you share together, and that's the basis for the conversation later on. I sometimes think, you can't go from coffee and donuts to, what are we doing about totalitarianism in the world today? That's too far. But maybe, to pick up on what Rob said, pick up on some project or some approach and have a small article or small thing and have a discussion of that. Start local, start where it doesn't implicate the biggest political values, and move out. And I also think, and I think you were talking about this as well, finding things to do together, even, building a garden, celebrating, an anniversary, if it's very hard to hate someone or to see them, as entirely disposable if you just spent an afternoon helping to deliver groceries or fixing somebody else's house. Working with someone is often better than talking with someone.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Can I just say one thing on that? In San Diego, when we had the first set of synod sessions, we actually had 3 years, every year for 3 years. But what was interesting was we had to find a way to get people together and then not interrupt one another. So we borrowed something that had been developed for the prisons, so that you hold so that no one interrupts anybody else. And so we had these sessions, and we had sophisticated note-taking for it. And the pastors told me that after it was over, the people came out and they were just delighted with each other. And then the pastors and the secretaries looked at the notes and they were diametrically disagreeing. But that's what we want. That is, because they had encountered one another as people of faith, struggling with different issues. And so I'd say that's the type of encounter that can build. We don't have to agree on these things, but if we can do it in a context in which we come away, here are people of true faith trying to wrestle with these things. That's what matters more than the particular outcome we have.
I thought that was such a remarkable aspect of this synod process, right? This process, this global listening process of building participation and communion and service to mission. And you saw people come together across difference because of that shared encounter, I think. Other questions? Go ahead, back there, Christian.
Good evening. Christian, at work here in Washington, D.C. I heard mentioned earlier the importance of how organizing can help these things.
Right.
Decades ago, so many Catholic churches were founders of interfaith organizing institutes. And today it's almost died. The participation's almost not there. So I wonder what our panelists can say. How can we have a revival of good, local, broad-based community organizing to build this community to answer some of these questions that we're trying to tackle?
Anybody want to take that, Vince?
I'd be happy to take that because I've gotten involved in some organizing over the years. And it's funny, my real introduction to it was going to London and working with people who had imported our organizing work from the United States, but we weren't really doing it anymore to the same degree. And now, that's not completely true, but, and it actually connects to the last question. Part of good organizing involves the concept of the one-to-one, right? Sitting down intentionally with one person and just talking, building a relationship. So I think there is incredible power in organizing work to do just that basic work of relationship building. I mean, there in London, I saw it work very powerfully with, you have evangelical churches and mosques and Anglican parishes in East London, in these working class neighborhoods. And these people have a lot of problems in common, but the tendency is for them to see themselves as, if not enemies, in very different silos, living in different silos. But these kinds of one-to-one conversations brought them together and really allowed them to activate their power as citizens to make real change happen in their communities. I've seen it work in parishes, to bring parishes together, to revive parishes. So I think there's some very basic steps that we could take by using that methodology, and then perhaps over time actually building up organizations that can also become, real instruments of democratic engagement.
And just to add on to that, one of my doctoral students who now teaches at Santa Clara, Nicholas Hayes Mota, who is a fellow of this center, did a dissertation exploring, the deep Catholic influence on organizing and the way in which its vision is consonant with some of the fundamental principles of Catholic anthropology. So that's another well-kept secret, I think, of Catholic social teaching. Some of its friends.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we have time for one more question. Student in the back, I think. No, go ahead. I'm sorry, my glasses aren't on. If you're not a student, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Catherine, and I'm one of Professor Daniel's students.
Oh, hi, Catherine. I really don't have my glasses on, or I would see you.
I think it's the light.
No worries at all. Kathy, your words about how many Catholics have utilized Pope John Paul II's teachings as justification to resist understanding others beyond their views because we regard them as contributors to the culture of death greatly resonated with me, especially as American society has become increasingly polarized. How can the Catholic Church instead articulate its teachings so that they serve as the basis of a more empathetic way of engaging with each other rather than justification for ignoring the dignity of our peers?
Oh my goodness, that's quite a question. Well, I think some of it is by understanding and naming why people take a different position, even if you're going to disagree with them. If you do a good job articulating why, for example, somebody might believe in the death penalty, or somebody might think legal abortion is a good thing, or somebody might be not attracted, that's not the right word, but feel like we need to legalize physician-assisted suicide. Understand and articulate what that reason is and how somebody could be pursuing something that is at least humanly understandable before saying, well, that's not maybe the best way to protect human dignity, and here's why. At least people will feel heard. And I think if you don't caricature other people's positions, you go a long way to having a reasonable argument or discussion with them.
I like it. Thank you. And thanks for that great question, Catherine.
You should get an A.
A, check it. A plus. I want to go around one more time with a quick answer, to everybody as we wrap up here. And of course, we're going to close out with a hymn at the end. But before we do that, Cardinal Murray, I want to start with you. You once talked about people becoming architects of hope, was your phrase, for a democracy and the common good. What's one concrete practice or step that people listening today could take to become those architects of hope?
I think if people resolved to seek out and speak with different people that they know think the opposite of them on different things, to see them as human beings first, and to get over, we live in these silos, we do, we consume our news in these silos and all this different, that to deliberately try to come to know and engage in the divisive topics, but do it first within the context of understanding their people. I want to understand why they feel that way.
Love it. Thank you. Vince, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think we need to locate ourselves in the power of empathy. I think this rhetoric we're hearing about the weakness of kindness, of empathy, of goodness should be a signal to all of us that we need to double down on those virtues. We need to really bring ourselves into those spaces, because why are they telling us not to? What are they serving in an effort to direct us away from the very things that Jesus spoke to in the Gospels over and over and over again? So, push yourself into empathy, try to understand, and engage in those conversations to learn and to maybe be changed, or to be empowered to make change.
Thank you for that. How about you, Kathy? What's one concrete habit, practice that people can take away tonight?
This might sound a little bit out of not left field or right field, but perpendicular field. I've been trying to figure out why so many people are drawn to these authoritarian movements and some of the more rigid approaches to life. And one of the things I think that people are missing is a sense of the transcendent. Even in the Second Vatican Council, we moved toward the immanent frame. We have to focus on life here, building the kingdom of God here. But we also have to recognize that people need a sense that here isn't all there is. There's a grounding and a transcendent moment that allows us to situate appropriately what's here. So I think we need to retrieve spiritual practices that allow us to sustain the journey and the challenges we're in.
I love that for tonight, because that's one of the reasons we have these Dahlgren dialogues, is to ground a conversation like this in prayer and in this wonderful hall with the chapel with the Eucharist right beside us. Thank you. Rob, what's one concrete practice or habit that people can do to become this architect of hope that Cardinal McElroy talked about?
Yeah, look for opportunities to practice civil friendship, which might just mean show up for the next Clean Up the Public Park Day, which draws folks from every spot on the political spectrum. And you might say, well, that's not going to solve the totalitarian crisis and the demise of democracy. Right, it's not. And that's not on your shoulders. That's not on my shoulders either. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be engaged there, but sometimes when we think that's on our shoulders, the effect of that tends to be paralyzing, because we don't have an easy path for that. So then we sit back. But when you're cleaning up the public park or myriad other projects that draw folks from across the ideological spectrum, it is giving you and neighbor experience of the civil friendship that Aristotle and Catholic social teaching has called us to do, to be in right relationship with God and neighbor.
Thank you for that. Thank you. I'm struck by a word that we haven't really mentioned tonight, but I think has been on the edges of our conversation, which is solidarity, right? This idea of standing in solidarity, rooted in the gospel, rooted in the dignity of all, standing in solidarity with the vulnerable in our neighborhoods, in our communities, as Catholics, and in light of the transcendent. So thank you all for that wonderful conversation. I want to also thank everybody here tonight, but first I want to thank, we have one of the world's foremost scholars scholars of John Courtney Murray here in the front row, Father David Hollenbeck. And as we thank our panelists here, I'd also like to thank Father Hollenbeck for his contributions to this work over the years. So thank you very much. You know, I'd also like to thank, of course, our colleagues in the Office of Mission Ministry here tonight, especially Father Mark Bosco, Father Andy Downing, Ryan Craig, Jill Hubbard, Owen Ruggiero, for helping us with this wonderful conversation here tonight, for co-sponsoring it with us and being such an important part of it. And also to my other student, Kira Farrell, for being such a wonderful contributor with the prayer at the beginning of this conversation. As always, I want to thank the wonderful initiative team for everything you all have done to pull this conversation together. All of those of you joining us both here in a very full Dahlgren Chapel and joining us online as well. You can see follow-up resources at our site, and of course the recording will be posted there. And if you're here with us, please join us in Healy Foyer for a reception right after we finish up here. Right now, we're going to, in a moment, you'll join us all. We'll all join in singing a hymn led by our colleagues in the Office of Mission and Ministry. But first, please join me in thanking Rob Vischer, Kathy Caveney, Cardinal McElroy, and Vince Truchot. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks. We'll go right over here.
Despair like deepest darkness has descended on our land, and discouraged hope of living out our faith by your command. You remind us, God, that sometimes love seems hidden but shines on, offering new life to all people like the brightness of the dawn. God of love, our dawn in darkness, shine with hope on our despair. Give us strength to stand for justice, heart to seek for what is fair. Give us grace to treat our neighbors with both kindness and respect, to befriend outsiders, strangers, other people may reject. In our nation so divided, in our world that cries for peace, let your love shine through the darkness, that all fears and doubts may cease. Grant us patience, understanding, and a will to share the light of your love with one another as we seek to do what's right.